Uh, I'm sorry, everyone. Let me start over. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a pleasure for me to come back to lead the Digital Future Discussion or Division, an annual event of the Center for Digital Society. In this session, we are going to discuss about AI and data protection, emerging risk themes, and impact on Asia. Before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Rizka Herdiani. I am a research assistant at Center for Digital Society, and for this special occasion, I would be a moderator to lead today's discussion. I guess smart people here already knew about today's topic. We would be doing a comprehensive discussion regarding AI and data protection, especially in the context of Asia, including Indonesia. Artificial intelligence, or AI, has captivated the global market for the past 8 years, leading to its widespread adoption in organizations for data processing activities. However, while AI has numerous benefits, it also presents risks to data protection, privacy, governance, and cybersecurity. Therefore, it is crucial to be aware of the potential risks related to data protection, governance, and cybersecurity that may arise from the use of AI. Through this event, the speakers will explain the what, why, who, when, and how of AI, as well as the associated risks to data protection, governance, and cybersecurity, and these factors that contribute to these risks, along with strategies for mitigating them. I can feel the enthusiasm, but remember, smart people, today's discussion will be in the form of a talk show. So we highly encourage you to truly actively participate and give your questions through the chat box. The format has been delivered by the admin through the chat box, and there will be a reward for the best participant at the end of the event. We also would like to remind you to keep staying until the end because the link of the certificate will be delivered by the admin also at the end of the event. Okay, for our first speaker is Perdana Karim. He is a research project officer at CfDS. And we also have the next speaker, who is Mr. Noriswadi Ismail, as a IAPP European Advisory Board member. Hello, Kakari. Hello, Mr. Norris. How are you?
Hello, Rizka.
Hello, Rizka. Good morning, everyone. I'm very good. Look forward to the discussion.
Me too.
Okay, great. Thank you for the time, Karim and Mr. Norris. It is really a great time to discuss AI and data protection because we will have a very diverse perspective from our speakers. Karim will talk about AI history and its evolution, especially in Indonesia. Another great perspective will be talked by Mr. Norris regarding the AI and data protection trends in ASEAN, also the key legal framework about this topic. Without further ado, we will be hearing the first talk from Karim. Karim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rizka. And again, let me introduce myself. My name is Perdana Karim. You may call me Karim or Perdana. I am a research project officer at the Center for Digital Society. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Norris. If I may deliver my topic first. So as Rizka mentioned, what I'll be talking about is mostly about the basic things about AI and how we can contextualize them in the Indonesian context. So let's begin with the history of AI in a sense. What is AI? I'm sure most of you here who are watching this diffusion right now already have a basic understanding of AI. I assume that all of you regularly watch our discussions, read our research, and enjoy our products. So AI, in a sense, is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence meaning that. Sorry, one second. So AI, in a sense, is basically the things that we now have the ability to enjoy day to day. So, for example, right now, AI is most popular, commonly known as, for example, ChatGPT amongst a lot of us, for example, amongst students, particularly. That's one example of AI. So, in a way, we can, explain and define AI as the ability of machines or computer programs to perform tasks that typically require human-like intelligence. Hence, why it's called artificial intelligence. So, from the examples that I mentioned before, it's like, for example, ChatGPT, Midjourney, and for example, DALL-E, those are basically forms of AI that have now become more commodified and accessible for the local masses. prior to this, AI was something that was sort of a jargonistic term that was used by a lot of tech companies to say, for example, in a way, showcase what they're capable of with their technology. It has now sort of become sort of a buzzword for a lot of people because it sounds cool, it sounds techno, very technological, it sounds very advanced, and it's a very common term that's been used as sort of a marketing gimmick. But now we've sort of seen how AI has become more and more readily available for the daily lives. We have virtual assistants. You may refer them. Technically, they are in a way artificial intelligence. Say, for example, like Google Assistant, Siri, or Alexa, those that we commonly use every day. And like I've mentioned before, ChatGPT and Midjourney, for example, those are the new forecomers in the AI battlefield, where they basically are trying to create something out of a problem that we give for them. So, for example, ChatGPT is basically a chatbot that has AI in it, so it's able to generate answers in a way that differentiates for example, like search engines such as Google and Bing, for example. They're able to be to concise the answers that we are looking for. So, say for example, if you Google the term artificial intelligence in Google, they will give you a list of links that refer to things that may talk about AI. But if you do the same thing on ChatGPT, for example, it will try to give you a brief description of what is artificial intelligence, and that's basically what is AI in general. And other than that, let's talk about a bit about the history and the usage of AI in Indonesia. So in a discussion like this, I would like to be frank and say that the AI development in Indonesia is, how I say, it's not that it's not the best, but it's still struggling in some areas. It's still very emerging. It's a very emerging field. There are many variables that hamper the development of AI. For example, the lack of competent workers in this field, and also the lack of development funding, research and development funding, where we know that Indonesia doesn't really tend to fund a lot on programs like this. So that's why for the most part development is still quite slow, but that doesn't mean that development is not there. There have been efforts made by the government in trying to push the artificial intelligence agenda in Indonesia. For example, Indonesia in 2020 in 2019 developed the national AI strategy of 2020 to 2045, or basically the Statnas KAI as we know. So basically it is a sort of a national strategic, in a way, sort of like a module, a guideline of how AI will be developed in Indonesia. As we know from the Statnas KAI itself, from the national strategy, there are basically five main components, which are basically education and human capital, research and development, data and infrastructure, regulation and policy, and ecosystem and industry development. Those are the main parts that the government is trying to push in the AI agenda. They feel that AI can be implemented so much into this, and we've seen the usage of AI is, like I mentioned before, it was very very exclusive. So a lot of, say for example, tech companies or startup companies developed and use AI for their for their day-to-day tasks. For example, we've seen for example, like Gojek and also Grab, Shopee. In a way, those have some form of AI in them. In the way that they use algorithms in order to be able to predict what is that we like, to be able to understand what food that we like to order, to be able to track our trip history and see where do we go frequently, and decide who gets more promos than others. Basically, in a way, those use a form of artificial intelligence. But when we talk about artificial intelligence again, so I might backtrack a bit. It seems to be like a very broad definition. So, but in a way, we are now seeing, in I see myself in academia, for example, due to the proliferation of ChatGPT. A lot of my friends are now using ChatGPT quite frequently. So I guess we could say that in terms of development usage, I guess in terms of development, Indonesia is still, in its baby steps, in its infancy. It's still there, but not quite. And and of course, every time we compare Indonesia with other countries, it always seems like Indonesia is lagging behind. But sometimes we have to give ourselves a pat on the back. In a way, the fact that we already have a national strategy for AI is something to be proud of, is something to be celebrated. Not every country has the same sort of national strategy. But then again, the next step is how do we implement this and how do we sort of envision this national strategy is the next step. But in terms of usage, I reckon that Indonesia is, as anyone in this in the 21st century is now a frequent user, whether we know it or not, whether we are actively using AI or whether we are passively using. So if I had to say, prior to ChatGPT and its proliferation, for example, we were passively using AI. A lot of our daily life, day-to-day technologies has implemented AI features in them, but we didn't realize that they were AI features, or maybe they were just jargonistic. But nowadays that we've seen the proliferation of active usage of AI like ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALI, and all that stuff, goes to show that people are actually intrigued in trying to use this. Whether it's for beneficial gains, whether it's for funds, basically. So this sort of push means that nowadays people are becoming more aware of what AI is and how AI is being used. So when we talk about AI, I guess what I want to convey in my session here is sort of the pros and cons of AI. So of course, rather than talking about the basics, the history of AI, that's like anybody can search that up. But what I want to discuss with everyone here is sort of to, try and think: are there any pros and are there any cons about using AI? Are there any positives? Or are there negative? Or are there more positives or are there more negatives in using AI? So the way I see it when it comes to using AI, I view it as a tool. Say for example, ChatGPT. A lot of media, mainstream media, especially from the global north, have sort of exaggerated the power of ChatGPT and all these other like open AI AIs, for example, say for example, DALI and Midjourney. Exaggerated in a way that they say that, okay, this is something that can be used to cheat tests, for example. This is something that students are using to cheat their exams, for example. But I feel, and I've seen many cases that the tool is only as good as the user itself. Due to its proliferation right now, we have seen many cases of the failure of using ChatGPT. For example, nowadays we see that many people are adopting in order to be able to combat the usage of ChatGPT. For example, you could look at it at Turnitin or any plagiarism checker website. They more or less know whether it's been made by ChatGPT or not. But that's where the problem stems. In a way that people think that the AI is something they could just simply use to copy and paste answers, but not as a tool. So, say for example, the way that I use ChatGPT is when I was formulating what to talk about in this presentation, I, for the most part, also asked ChatGPT, hey, tell me what you want to say in this presentation if you were to present this presentation. I asked ChatGPT what do they want to talk about, and it was interesting. They wanted to say that that AI is merely a tool. So, but it doesn't mean that I copy pasted what ChatGPT gave me to present to everyone here. But what I did was, okay, this is an interesting topic. Let's look into it more and see what we can, develop more on that. So, in using the AI as a tool in a way to create a foundation, in a way to create your, the building blocks of your output. So you don't use it as the output per se, but use it as a, as a stepping stone to get to where you want to. That's how I view as how people should use AI, and that's what I think is the pros of using AI in a sense. So in a way that you have an improved efficiency and productivity in various industries. So it cut costs in in matters of time. For example, things that would take you, for example, a day or two could simply just be reduced to minutes and seconds, as long as you get the AI to do what it needs for you, when it needs what you need for it to do, for example. And it's reliable in a sense, but the reliability of ChatGPT is also contested by a lot of people. Some say that it's not reliable, some say it's reliable, but then again, that depends on how niche of the thing that you're talking about. The more general that you're talking about something, then of course it's going to be more reliable because everybody is getting the same answers and it's a more common answer. Say for example, me as an IR student asking it to analyze things with a different perspective of international relations, for example, that's quite niche. Then it might not be correct. It might not be as reliable as that. And that's where we can validate and look at other sources itself. And, in a way, it sort of creates more competition. I view this as sort of a pros in a way that humans have always not wanted to lose to the machines. They've been trying to find ways to innovate, to be able to order, to combat, the machines in a way. So even though AI is there, but then again, it's merely a tool. It's only as strong as the user who uses it. So in a way, having ChatGPT's presence in, academia and the workforce sort of motivates people to understand, how do we utilize ChatGPT? How do we use it for our, for our benefits? Not to let the ChatGPT replace us, but to complement us in our work. So that sort of competitiveness to drive and to understand how the AI works is something that I view as a pro itself. And those are basically the pros and cons. So basically, those are the pros. Sorry. Now for the cons, we see many people, argue that with AI, then job displacement is very imminent. We see that many jobs can just simply be replaced by AI. For example, ChatGPT itself can, basically create a storyboard for video production. It can create content for social media. It can create content calendars for social media and so on and so forth. So, a lot of that, people are afraid that a lot of their creative jobs will be replaced by AI. But I argue that sure, that may be sort of a con in a way, that it is something negative to fear of, but it's not not something that is too dire to be afraid of, in a sense that there are still many jobs that rely on the human touch. Something that AI fails to do is to have the same human sympathy and empathy. It can emulate a lot of things about human intelligence, but it cannot emulate human feelings as of the moment. So in regards to job displacement and unemployment, it's still far, I reckon. It depends on how advanced the AI becomes. So who knows? After this discussion, there'll be a super AI that replaces, what I do, for example. Then I might be worried about my job. But as of the moment, the progress of AI is quite, steadily going forward, but not drastically enough that it will replace me at any time soon. Hopefully. And one of the common critiques about AI is how there tends to be biases in the AI algorithms, which can sort of perpetuate discrimination and sort of reinforce inequalities. When you implement AI in, for example, facial tracking, there have been many cases, for instances, for example, where white people who have brighter faces are able to be detected easily compared to, for example, people who have darker skin tones, for example. It sort of perpetuates the notion that these AIs cannot track who has the fairer skin tone, and so on and so forth. And sometimes when we talk about AI, there's security risks, such as the lack of transparency and the accountability in these AIs, in a way that, how does the AI create this decision, in how does ChatGPT create this answer? And but in regards to data privacy and security reasons, that's a very strong concern. It's a very strong concern for any aspects of technology, but that also depends on what are you feeding the AI. I've seen TikToks of people, using ChatGPT 4, which is the more advanced ChatGPT, which you actually have to pay a subscription for, and they use ChatGPT 4 to try and save money, in a way that they look at their bank statements, their bank accounts, and try to filter out any unwanted subscriptions. But that means that that person had to give their bank security details to the AI itself, which means that that is something that he did willingly, not something that the AI requested. In terms of data itself, for example, all you need to do to utilize ChatGPT, for example, is to sign up with an email, and that's basically what you're giving. And any other data that it takes is basically what you're giving it to it, what you're giving to the AI, which is something, by extent, is something that you consent to. So basically, in terms of data protection, that all depends on how you utilize the AI itself. Are you those who are willing to be open and give everything to the AI, or are you someone that just wants to limit to what you can give to the AI itself? And another con is, because another negative side is that, because this is a very emerging technology, of course, the implementation of AI and the cost of implementing and maintaining it is still very high. Not a lot of the adoption rate, although, is quite high in itself, in regards to, say, for ChatGPT and so on and so forth. But the very industry AI, the ones that that a lot of tech companies use, not a lot of those can, not other small companies can adopt said technologies, because it's still quite expensive. It's proliferated in a way that is accessible, but it doesn't mean that it is acquirable. It means that there is still an economic gap. For example, again, I keep using ChatGPT as an example. I hope you're all okay with this because I myself use ChatGPT quite often. But again, using that as an example, $20 a month for a ChatGPT for subscription for me, for someone who lives in Indonesia, is quite significant because $20 is around 300,000 rupiah. And if that's a month, that's like almost, that is substantial. That is a lot of money for Indonesian rupiah for a lot of us. But you argue that it's an investment. You could do a lot of things with ChatGPT 4. That's true, but then again, I'm also limited to the capabilities of myself. The way that I use ChatGPT right now is basically to find data and to have summaries of things that I should be reading myself. I'm not doing intense and active work like how people do, for example, on social media. So again, that sort of paywall is sort of something that makes it more hard to implement and sort of maintain the usage of AI because it's more expensive. So that to me is how I feel those are the pros and cons of AI. And I'm happy to discuss with everyone here if there's any pros and cons of AI that you feel that you've felt throughout the years of implementing AI. So to summarize my discussion, because I'm sure Mr. Norris has many more interesting things that he wants to talk about. So in conclusion, uh, I think AI is here to stay. And the way that I see it is that we have to sort of shift our minds and think that AI is merely a tool. So don't fall into the fallacy of how the media sort of perpetuates the fear mongering of how AI will replace jobs, how AI can replace jobs, but AI is a tool that is only limited by the users itself. The way that because again, a lot of the social medias are using ChatGPT as references too, because it's quite prominent again. So I will use that again. Looking at ChatGPT and the way it sort of shifted the dynamics of academia, for example, I feel that it's a bit hyperbole in a sense that we are too giving it too much credit, because I've seen time and time again where people try to use ChatGPT, but it's very obvious that they aren't using ChatGPT. As simple as knowing what to copy and paste, or not copy and pasting at all. So a funny example that I saw was somebody from America or something. A student was trying to write an essay, but they copied the whole text of ChatGPT. And if you're aware, and if you use ChatGPT, the first sentence of ChatGPT is, "As an AI language model, I may not know much about this, but here are my answers." That part was copied. So it goes to show that the limitations and the weakness of AI is inherently us, the humans, who should have more intelligence than the artificial intelligence that we created, but I argue that's the limitations. So it depends on who uses it. Any tool, if used for good and used correctly, can be a powerful and amazing tool if used for good. But then, if used for bad things, then of course it can lead to bad things. But that depends on, how we regulate the usages of these AIs. A lot of universities have started to adopt, creating regulations against ChatGPT, for example. But, I view it as something that it can be, complementary to the studies. Let's face it, in academia sense, now we are more trying to memorize this, the materials rather than implementing and understanding the materials. We are trying to do work in a way to only merely pass the grade but not to learn something from it. So if anything, it sort of shows how academia nowadays have sort of shifted its goal, and how AI, ChatGPT as its disruptor, sort of shows that students are not as motivated as they were once before. So what is the problem then? That's like a whole entire discussion and a whole entire debate. But the problem is not the AI itself. The AI merely sort of shown the vulnerabilities and the weakness of academia in a sense. So I might have strayed off a little bit, but the conclusion that I'm trying to say is that AI is here to stay. If anything, it will only continue to grow. So as people who are living in the 21st century, for those of you who are still the Gen Z, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for the cohorts of the younger generation, learn how to use these AIs. I've seen a lot of young children use AI to create arts for their own personal self, to try and like replicate themselves by drawing manually and all that stuff. So there's no limits to what AI can do. The limitation is only yourself. So that means that we have to study and understand how to use these AIs. And I think that should be all from my part. So I'm I'm done for the most part. So I'll give back to Rizka, and I want to hear more from Mr. Norris about his materials. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kakarin, for the insightful perspective. I actually have a few questions myself regarding the talking points that you just presented to the audience and myself as well. But for now, we are going to move to the next speaker. Welcome again, Mr. Norris. Are you ready?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rizka, and as well as to the Center for Digital Society for having me here as part of this fire chat discussion. I think Perdana Karim has excellently illustrated, the foundation, the definition at a very high level, and as well as, the functionalities and the trend, about AI, particularly in the generative AI, for example, ChatGPT and others. So let me step back. Let me bring you guys 100 years ago, or maybe more than 100 years ago, when the first time electricity was invented. Because during those years, okay, people were so shocked. Wow, what is this invention is all about? And then after how many centuries is business as usual? It's just like one invention that's actually being applied, being deployed in the context of this day and age. So that's such an example, in relation to electricity. And then as years go by, we could see the invention of www, the internet, and this is the Y2K, and also other emerging technologies. We talk about Internet of Everything, where data is actually core that connect, everything, one technology, one device, another device. And we're talking about smart home, smart devices. Technically, that is already an evolution of AI, but the term it has been defined academically by professors, in the US and some professors actually in the EU, where what exactly this is all about. Again, it's still being debated. In fact, one of the areas which the EU or European Commission actually highlighted when they drafted the EU AI Act, which actually currently at the second and third stage, advanced conversation and discussion debate in the EU Parliament, is in relation to the definition. So there's no such thing like an exact definition on AI. Again, in a very simple language, it's about how exactly a machine would intimate, human intelligence, right? Who designed this machine? Human being. Who code this machine? Human being, right? What exactly behind the coding? Algorithm. And what exactly behind this algorithm is actually the data set or the quintillions of data set that actually these coders and designers actually have been focusing in the lab. So the reality that we are seeing in ChatGPT context, because in the US comparatively, when they actually code, when actually design this ChatGPT, even at the early stage of development, the US do not have a very robust sandbox kind of culture. So what sandbox means, if let's say if you want to actually like design a technology, you have to actually get an open consultation with regulators, with policymakers, with variety of stakeholders, and collect the feedback and actually ask them, what do you think? So what US did about ChatGPT, for example, is, you know what, we don't care. We just launched the product, we will get the feedback from the market. And that's why it's a hot. And that's why regulators realize that, hey, you've not reached out to us. Even the UK regulator, even regulators in the member states in the EU are fully like confused. Wow, what is ChatGPT all about? I remember when the launch of ChatGPT, a few months ago, my LinkedIn post is all about ChatGPT every day. And most of my, colleagues internationally from the privacy professional, advisory board members actually try to articulate it in a way that the way ChatGPT business model, business strategy, marketing model is to get more data from you guys. The more data you key in, the more accurate the modeling would be, in the future. Because whatever things that the ChatGPT captured, virtually and globally through different kinds of, deep learning doesn't mean that it falls under the accuracy of facts. It might be false positive or false negative. It might be partially accurate or it might be partially inaccurate. And that's important to have the so-called human intervention, human kind of accuracy kind of process, and to ensure that whatever facts that you actually ask on ChatGPT, ensure that you do not take this as 100% accurate. And you have to do further kind of research and calibration exercise. So this is just a reflection, as to what exactly, and excellently, Perdana Karim has actually illustrated in that sense. So push forward. Where are we today, right? Throughout my engagement with stakeholders around the world, whether with the government, with multinational companies, even with startup, or even with medium-sized companies, whenever there's a new technology, whenever there's new invention, okay, these are the four issues that typically arise. The first is culture. Second is people. Third is ethics. Fourth is conduct and behavior, right? If you categorize these four, culture, in Asia, in Middle East, we like to share. We like to share data without even asking for consent, right? Culturally, we are like that. And similarly to the Middle East culture, right? They like to share data. They say, all right, okay, we just share data. We just want to ensure that everyone get the data. Whereas comparatively in the EU, you can't do that because in the state constitution of each of the member states in the EU, data protection and privacy is actually human rights. And you have to actually acknowledge that the fact that it's part and parcel of your organic DNA, not only the context of the business, but also in the context of how you really, really process the data on a day-to-day basis. That itself, at a very high level when it comes to culture, really gives a very strong or perhaps engaging challenge to region like ASEAN. Okay, even when we talk about ASEAN, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and as well as Cambodia, Thailand, and data protection laws are emerging in this region, right? So you have to understand that culture is important. Second, people, right? Okay, when we talk about people, it depends on how exactly they view, this technology, view this data, and sometimes they overlook the risk of doing, or processing the data. Okay, for example, right, in your house, in amongst the family members, I suppose some of you guys are, Gen Zs. You have a lots of apps on your mobile phone, and you do have a smart devices at home, smart home, and you actually process lots of data. And if you do a self audit in your home, partially there are lots of AI element that is being driven in your home. Okay, is in a house setting. What more in the context of employment? Because in employment, there are a variety of reasons why companies want to commercialize the data, companies want to mine the data because of part of the marketing model, right? And you use AI to re-trigger this exercise, whether or not it is through deep learning through different kind of models of AI. And that's why if you see these two differences at home, in employment context or even in societal context, okay, there are a variety of different kind of lenses and reasons as to why you want to use that particular data set. Is it for commercial purpose, or is it for personal purpose, or is it for new purpose? And if it's for future purposes. And this is where the complexity is when it comes to the context of data protection law, or so in the EU, comparatively, we call it the EU GDPR, which is actually the gold standard that other legislation around the world, for example, in Indonesia or in Southeast Asia, have been relying on in terms of how exactly you need to really not only understand the data taxonomy, the data principles, and not only that, ask a very key question. All right, what exactly I'm doing with this data? Am I going to share this data to third party, or am I going to delete this data once I process the data, or am I going to retain the data? If I retain the data, will I retain this data forever? And I'm not surprised. A lot of organizations, a lot of individuals have been, retaining, perhaps, processing this data indefinitely, right? So that's actually what we are seeing, in the world today, not only in the context of ASEAN, but also, rest of the world. I really like Perdana's view in relation to AI is still there. I totally agree. I'm really a big fan of technology, but at the same time, when you want to really use emerging new technologies, you feel like wow, you feel like so engaged. So everything behind the technology, the core is the data. So one of the things that we actually asked, stakeholders is that when everyone actually really use a particular technology, the first question is, do you really read ChatGPT privacy notice? That's the first question. Okay. Maybe you should put in the chat who actually has read or have read ChatGPT privacy notice. Okay. If someone has read, I would love to actually like engage more. Maybe not maybe later. Right. Okay. What exactly you understand by the ChatGPT privacy notice, if any? If you have read ChatGPT notice, do you know that how long ChatGPT really retain the data? Are they going to delete the data? These are the fundamental questions, right? And this is actually one of the reasons as to why some regulators are actually seeing the ChatGPT business model and approach in global level to be very much like a little bit of contradicting some of the data protection principles, partly in the EU GDPR, and some actually highlighted that it is not unclear what exactly that they are doing in the context of the data. All right. ChatGPT is just one of the generative AI, technology, but there are lots more in the market where lots of generative AI or that have been using machine learning, depending upon different kind of models of machine learning, to ensure that they are not using personal data when they really put certain AI function there. And there is also alternative AI providers saying that we have filtered personal data. We are not processing personal data in the context of our AI, a kind of function, which is so great because in a way that itself will limit potential risks when it comes to data breach, when it comes to any areas that might concern any jurisdictions around the world. Okay, so that's actually another aspect that perhaps you need to think about, not in the context of the current landscape, but also in the future, in the next 5 to 10 or 20 years. So when I, departed, from KL to Jakarta, I actually bought a very nice book. This book is actually called "Will AI Dictate the Future?" Right? This book is by Dr. Anton Ravindran. He's actually one of the, really esteemed, professor and as well as a business leader, where he actually highlighted about, right, okay, yes, AI will stay, but however, there are areas that we can really benefit AI for humanity, benefit AI to actually encourage more economic growth, benefit AI to ensure that we still understand the significance of ethics and being responsible. These are the two things that everyone, all and sundry, should understand, right? In the future, for example, okay, you might be a legal counsel, or you might be a CEO of your own startup or company, or you might be one of the VCs that really want to invest, in AI, investment, because nowadays there has been lots of, discussion in relation to how to actually transform AI as a service. If you look into during the cloud convergence era, cloud computing era, during those years, people were so confused. What is this cloud all about, right? What is this cloud computing model? Is it okay? There's a variety of models, and not many wanted to use the cloud because of the potential risk, in that kind of environment. And AI is now undergoing that process in relation to its journey. And in order for AI to really ensure that the output and the clarity or the functionality really achieve what needs to be achieved from the stakeholders' perspective, they need to disseminate this in a very simple language. What exactly is AI is all about? Are we going to process personal data? Are we going to transfer this data to rest of the world, outside Indonesia and the rest of the world? And bearing in mind, in the current draft of the current PDP, which is the Indonesian law, there is data residency, which is data localization requirement. Yep, this is actually an example. And can I also share the data in the context of the AI platform to outside Indonesia, for example, right, to China, because China has its own algorithmic regulation, and also, EU has its current draft of AI Act, and also to the US, which is one of the top advanced economies around the world. So if you really want to engage in this kind of data sharing or perhaps data transfer outside Indonesia to the rest of the world, this is actually one of the key risk questions. I'm not saying that when someone say AI is high risk, do not actually anticipate that. So you have to fully understand, right? There's always risk. Whether or not it is high risk, medium risk, or low risk, it depends on the data set. It depends on the sources of the data set, and it depends on whether this data set is categorized as sensitive personal data in the context of PDP in Indonesia, or comparatively in the context of the EU GDPR, or comparatively in the context of other data protection legislation around the world. Okay, so these are actually one of the key themes or risk themes or questions that you might want to think about. When you want to engage in AI conversation, AI research, or AI project. Once you be part, of the future AI team at the global, regional, and local level. Another point that I would like to highlight is that nowadays we can see that when people talk about AI, they really do not understand. Okay, is the question whether is this ethical or not ethical, and is it something that should be categorized as responsibility of your organization or individual responsibility or otherwise. So it goes back to the conduct and behavior, because conduct and behavior from the commercial context, from the corporate context, is equally important. Let's say, for example, you are a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, or Chief Data Officer, or even Chief Privacy Officer of a large, the largest, financial services or bank in Indonesia, right? The key question that you need to ask, the coders, the AI team that actually develop whatever that needs to be developed based on different model is, right, is this ethical? What are we doing is ethical? If it's ethical, how we would like to actually translate that into the proper communication channel to the wider business partners. For example, to the third-party suppliers, to the consumers, to the clients, even to the government, and also to the relevant regulators that might be very interested and keen to listen and to understand how a particular leader develop a so-called governance program that really support at ongoing AI initiatives. So comparatively in Southeast Asia, that in Singapore, there is AI assurance governance framework. It's a very good framework. So if you actually Google, don't ask ChatGPT, try Google first. If you Google AI research governance framework, the Personal Data Protection Commission of Singapore, which is the regulator in Singapore, has outlined the areas of assurance. It's more like self-auditing. It's more like asking key audit questions, self-assessment. So comparatively in GDPR, there's privacy impact assessment, which is part of privacy by design and security by design. Okay, that you need to actually apply, and you need to actually deploy, and you need to tell to the coders, to anyone, the technologist team, and even to the marketing team, right? Okay, these are actually the key questions that we need to think about before you want to launch a particular product or service that is triggered or accelerated by AI, right? Bearing in mind, these questions are not actually meant to block the way you want to use AI. It's not a compliance blocker. There's always an impression when someone asks legal questions or audit questions, or you're blocking the business. No, you are trying to actually balance that. Balance the business kind of mission, vision, marketing strategy, business strategy, and as well as you can also be part of increasing the brand value, because if you have this kind of communication or PR that hey, our product is actually AI infused or triggered by AI, and our product is privacy and security by design embedded, and our product only process this data set, personal data. That itself is a very powerful PR, a very powerful engagement with stakeholders. Because if you have this kind of example, I think that everyone will follow. And bear in mind, if let's say one of you guys are actually influencer or YouTuber, or I know there are many influencers and YouTubers in Indonesia based on my research. So maybe in the future you might want to create a content about hey, let's understand about AI, what exactly the data issues, and you actually develop series of kind of campaign and telling to your network and the business that you know what, We still can do business. We can still use AI, but okay, you need to address 5 questions. You need to embed privacy by design and security by design as part of that particular exercise, right? So comparatively, if you look into the UK position after Brexit, the UK regulator, the Information Commissioner's Office, has been very dynamic to listen from the business. As a regulator, what the UK regulator did is that, right, tell us what exactly your challenges are, right? Let us listen. So the UK regulator did a 3 month listening exercise. There are 3 key takeaways from the listening exercise. The first is, right, we understand AI is a huge concern, and we understand that there's still blurry or gray area in the context of the law, in the context of regulation, and in the context of policy. So that's the first key takeaway. The second key takeaway is that there are ongoing research and ongoing development to target children's personal data, not just in the UK, but also at the global level, partly because some of the children and some of the teenagers, they like to play games, right? They purchase smart toys and they don't understand privacy notice. They don't understand privacy policy. They just tick all the boxes, and all of these companies target children's data, and they want to commercialize the data triggered by AI, because AI can really predetermine some of the aspect, not only in the context of the neurodiversity of the children, but also in the context of the so-called psychological aspect and predetermined behavior of the children. So that's the second key takeaway. And the third key takeaway is that the ICO, the UK regulator, okay, will keep on doing listening exercise with other regulators around the world. For example, in Asia, in the EU, and as well as in the US. And because of this exercise, right, the UK has issued the Children's Code, which is part of that listening exercise. And in California, for example, there is California Consumer Privacy Act, or the California Consumer Privacy Rights Act, which will be enforced soon. And one of the things that they're looking into to extend this children code more from the US perspective, which is called as the Children Appropriate Design Code, in the US. So these are actually still work in progress. So I totally echo what Perdana Karim highlighted a while ago. Even though in the context of Indonesia landscape is work in progress, it is also a work in progress in the rest of the world, right? You guys are not alone, because regulators are still listening, businesses are still understanding what does it mean to them, and also consumers are still struggling to understand what exactly AI in a very simple language, what exactly AI, what we can understand as consumer. And comparatively, when you look into China, when you look into Japan, when you look into South Korea, the reason why I cherry pick these Asian countries, because it is a technology advancement, they are quite very, very high at that level, right? And then they have been doing a lots of silent research and within the lab, just to ensure that how exactly we can really balance privacy by design, security by design, triggered by AI, and ensure that we keep on campaigning, to the stakeholders at the global level, that okay, AI in the future, in the next 20 to 50 years, will be like the normal business as usual, like the search engine, like electricity, like other inventions that we are using, like cars. Okay, 200 years ago maybe, okay, people thought, wow, what's that vehicle? Okay, why the vehicle is like really go. Now it's that everyone is using car, right? So if you think more from the futuristic perspective, and then you really visualize this as part of scenario planning. Okay, in the 20 years, what will Indonesia be if AI will drive as a backbone, in the daily life? And maybe next 50 years, what will Indonesia and ASEAN will be when it comes to AI that will be part of that? Maybe there will be an AI regulator in Indonesia. I don't know. Maybe there might be ASEAN AI regulator because of too much, complexity when it comes to data sharing amongst member states in ASEAN. Or maybe there'll be a global AI, kind of board, or global AI kind of organization that will actually really make a baseline or framework, as part of that kind of so-called convention or treaties. These are actually one of the areas and issues, or perhaps thought process, that stakeholders at the global level have been advocating. So I think with that I pause, and I know that there are 12, you know, so-called so-called threats, but I've not the time to actually read the questions. So I leave the remaining time for Q&A. Thanks very much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Norris, for also the very insightful perspective. There's a lot of points that he was discussing about regarding key legal frameworks and the existing global controls regarding AI, and also uh, its emerging trends and innovation issues and lesson learned regarding AI frameworks. I thank you so much, sir, Mr. Norris. I myself actually have one to two questions, and this applies to both Karim and Mr. Norris. So the first thing is regarding the application of AI in government institutions. Uh, Mr. Norris himself, yourself, you mentioned that a lot of AI itself is applied in private sectors, but if Karim might also know, I mean, since it was spreading around social media, I forgot which ministry it was in Indonesia, but one of them already applied AI as a representative of the ministry, and in itself, I find it quite intriguing, interesting, but also concerning because when it comes to AI application in the public sector, it means facilitating public services, which means that personal data could be used when it comes to communicating or interacting with these AI representatives. What are your thoughts on this matter, and would that mean that the framework that needs to be implemented in these governmental institutions should be more or less the same with those that are implemented in private sectors, or would be need to be tweaked a bit since it's regarding public matter or public personal data? Maybe I'll start with Mr. Norris first, and then Karim.
Sure. Thanks very much, Rizka. That's a very excellent question. I think even that question is actually, hard to answer, to be honest. And I always actually respond, depends. Because it's like when you ask a lawyer. I mean, of course, I'm a qualified lawyer by training, and now I'm consulting. So it depends on the purpose and what exactly the usage of the personal data is all about, whether it's in the government and as well as in the private sector. But the reality that we are seeing, not just in the context of Indonesia through my observation so far, and as well as in Southeast Asia, even Asia, as a continent, is that even some jurisdiction, in Asia, they exempt public sector, they exempt the government in terms of the data processing activities, whereas comparatively, when you look into the EU, the GDPR, it applies both to commercial, private sector, and the public sector as well. That itself really gives quite a lacuna or gap in relation to the purpose, as to why there's an exemption. For laymen, maybe they do not understand, but if you actually socialize this and deep dive this into more legal technical questions, especially to privacy lawyers, technology, media, telecommunication lawyers, and consultants, maybe they can really really articulate and contextualize it. The purpose why the government is exempt in some jurisdictions is partly because there is already internal government kind of security code or security guidelines or certain information guidelines in relation to the processing of personal data on a day-to-day basis. However, this is where the legal head comes in. However, if you look from the bigger picture perspective, the government is the largest data controller, right? Because the government processed most of the citizens' data, right? Okay, in the context of immigration, in the context of national registration, in the context of transaction, even in the context of investigation, in context of enforcement. If let's say there's a cross-border enforcement from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, for example, and it's actually currently, I would say that quite delicate debate because partly because some jurisdictions really want to establish its own regional persona, its own regional gravitas, right? So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that the emergence of data localization, in that context. Because I had a very interesting, learning and relearning exercise yesterday in the University of Indonesia, where the Dean of Faculty of Law was one of the earlier, leaders and drafters, in relation to the current, PDP, and also have been consulting, the current stakeholders in Indonesia in relation to the data sovereignty and in relation to the data localization in Indonesia, and also highlighted about the APEC cross-border privacy rule. If let's say if you are actually a member of APEC economies, whether you are corporate or perhaps you're very keen to transfer data within the APEC member nations, okay, you have to really get certain certification through the certifying agent, for example. So that's a very high level, in relation to like more from the regulatory perspective and justice perspective. Now we go to the second level, the operational level. The reality that we are seeing on the ground today is really, really like rojak. Sorry, I have to use the word rojak, right? It's like hybrid, So it depends. It depends on the purpose. It depends on, how long you process the data. It depends on, the retention of the data. And if you look into the current landscape in Southeast Asia, all the financial technologies, which is fintechs, are emerging, are mushrooming, right? They process a lots of data. It's seamless, okay, it is super disruptive as compared to traditional banks. And they are using partly AI to drive that, as part of that particular, technological innovation and invention and also advancement plus improvement. But at the same time, it goes back to the tone of the leadership. It goes back to the understanding of data dictionary, the understanding of data language. What is your data language in this fintech organization, and how exactly market this to the stakeholders? How exactly marketing do the PR exercise to the market, not only in the context of ASEAN, but also in the context of the world today. And this is actually where there's a missing link there, because not every consumer reads privacy notice, right? Okay, if I ask everyone here, do you really read your privacy notice and policy of all the apps that you downloaded on your mobile app? I'm not sure. I'm not saying that you are not reading it. What more, a layman, okay, that really want to download the app, whatever fintech app, and then they just like tick, 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 all done. We are human beings. We are so impatient. We want the product. We want the end result. And it's actually where that kind of awareness and PR campaign is important, meaning that all right at that level, commercial level, what exactly that you need to understand, you need to do the do's and don'ts. Very simple. Okay, for the others to understand the technicalities, of course, if someone has a technical background, legal background, regulatory background, they can really pick it up very easily. So I think that's my reflection and to respond to your question. Sorry, a little bit quite a lengthy question, so that I can give more airtime to Karim to respond to his views here to the question.
That's okay, Mr. Norris. Okay, perhaps Karen, any thoughts and comments?
Yeah. I agree on the fact that when we talk about these sort of regulations, sometimes government are exactly exempt because they have their own, as Mr. Notice said, their own personal security code. They have their own conducts, and that's something that sometimes, as everyday people, we tend to forget that government institutions and government officials are in a different world of their own. uh, Small unrelated case, but to me I think it's sort of related. So for context, recently President Joko Widodo went to Lampung, and the roads were quite bumpy, and he was using his own car. We call that RI1, Republik Indonesia Satu, so his own car. But maybe many people his own personal government issued car, which is not made for the terrain which is in Lampung, which is all the bumpy roads. And a lot of the citizens argue and complain, why not use something that's suitable for that sort of terrain? Why not use something like a big truck, like those truck with big wheels and stuff like that. But what people don't realize is that that is for security reason in itself. That car in itself is how we envision President Joe Biden's car. How when he went to G20 Indonesia, bought his own personal car here, is for security reasons. sometimes those things don't just make sense to us because we're not a part of that sort of inner circle. So I think the sort of the exclusivity of government itself is in a way sort of de facto that we sometimes have to accept, but it's still so hard to accept because we don't want to accept that narrative. We don't want to accept that in the reality that there is sort of a difference between us people who are living our daily day-to-day lives and those who are the government officials. But that's is the reality. And a bit of tangent, but in a way, does this affect in AI applications and so on and so forth? Maybe it does. I mean, to them, they're not that worried about data protection or data security because their data protection, data security is more robust than the data protection and security that we have. The strongest data protection that we have maybe is two-factor authentication, for example, that's provided by Google and many other tech company services. But maybe for them, they have their own encryption. I argue that I mean the fact that the presidents don't just randomly choose what phone they get, and that that not even in just government itself, in public sectors, workers get their own laptops from their companies because it's encrypted. Goes to show that security and data protection measures have been thought on these more exclusive sectors, whether it's public and private sectors and government sectors. It's just that we, the day-to-day people don't experience this sort of thing. So that's why it feels like we're out of the loop, and it feels like it's such a different world because it indeed is a different world. So a little bit of a tangent, and trying to use day-to-day cases to sort of make sense of this strange, bizarre reality that we live in. But that's sort of my takeaways of this. I give back to you, to Rizka.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Norris and Karim, for the insightful answer and comments regarding the matter on the implementation of AI when it comes to the government sector. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we are entering the Q&A session for our third session of today's discussion. I would like to open the floor for everyone to respond or ask any questions to our speakers. It seems, the Q&A will be divided into two sections, with each section containing 3 questions. We already collect a few questions from our audience. So we'll start with first question from Onel Paramanandini from Erlangga University. So aside from written data that got captured by AI, recently there's a unique phenomenon of the turning yourself into cartoon art trend, where people upload their face to photo app, and in return their photo will turn into cartoon style with the help of the AI application. This shows that people can get easily being unaware of their visual data just to follow the trend, where these photos could actually be saved, learned, and captured by AI or the company who handles the AI machine without knowing. And even if there's rules stated in terms of service on their app, sometimes people don't read this just to hop in the trend. And this shows how the urgency of AI learning awareness needs to be planned. And the question regarding this matter is, what kind of thing we need to do to share this awareness to society? Perhaps we'll start with Karim this time, and then Mr. Norris.
Sure. Okay, it's a very interesting question. In the sense that that's just how human nature is. We just bandwagon to trends without realizing that the implication of the trends. And Onel have basically sort of illustrated what basically happens, and the question is, what do we need to do to raise this awareness? Well, I'm going to be quite bleak and sort of counter argument in a way that sure, uh, people have the right to do whatever they want with their data. Whether it's to publicly spread their data or to keep it private, that's entirely up to them. So rather than worrying, what about the data? What's going to happen? It's more like if people are content and consent with using these apps, which I'm sure by using that app means that they are consenting to that. It means that they're okay with their data being used, and there have been awareness. When this thing was trending, people sort of show the like this they'll take your data, they can use your data for. But that's the thing with new technology, as Mr. Norris mentioned from his analogy of electricity, which is sort of the analogy that we tend to use in AI and terms of technology. new things tend to be fearful. We tend to be afraid of new things because we don't understand the grasp of these new things. We don't fully understand what the limitations, what the impacts are of the new things, but sometimes we tend to hyperbole that fear. Turns out that maybe sometimes it's just a common thing and it's probably means nothing. So, I argue in a way that, not to be too bleak or anything, it's more like, even if they have your face data, then so what will happen? What is a little bit of a tangent in a context, but when it comes to security studies, in context of IR, for example, we tend to, if I'm not mistaken, if this is Joseph Nye or whoever, I forgot, but we tend to sort of a lot of proportions the risk of a security, in a sense that we tend to fear that security risk will always happen to us, particularly cybersecurity risk, but more often than not, it may or may not happen. And even if it happens, it will happen in 10, 15, or 30 years. It's sort of a ticking time bomb, in the sense that we don't know when it will tick, but we know for the fact that it's a bomb. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it will tick in a way. So for those who are unfortunate, who may have used the app and are fearful about how their data is being used, well, in a way, I'd say there are mechanisms where you can revoke that sort of data. There's always the right to be forgotten, but then again, we live in Indonesia, and right now, as of now, we have just recently implemented our personal data protection regulation. We only passed it, we haven't implemented yet. It takes 2 years times for implementation. So for those who be in Indonesia, I do not think we have the right to be forgotten, parts of regulation that can erase the data from the platform. But for those who are living in countries that have the GDPR, then by all means, you're well protected. So if you feel like your data is misused and misused, then by all means, evoke that right to be forgotten. But for those who are living in Indonesia, well, we are in a limbo of waiting to see how it goes. But in my own personal take, no need to worry, in a sense that, sure, there are many cases of, for example, frauds that happen due to data breaches and so on and so forth. But rather than focusing on how your data got leaked, it's more about focusing on how do we strengthen our data hygiene and data resilience, our cyber resilience, in a sense. How do we ensure that that we are more aware of these things if they happen again? So what has happened, that's okay. And which is why I'm sure the person asked the question, so what do we need to do to shed this awareness in society? Well, we need to talk about it more. We need to engage in the discourse and discussion about how this is affecting and how this may affect, but don't do it in a way that is fear mongering, that prevents people from simply enjoying their life, simply enjoying the technology. New technology is always nice to try and implement. Don't limit it for people who are enjoying these sort of things. Let them do that. But also tell them that, hey, this might be sort of a privacy concern. Please be more mindful and be more careful if, for example, you want to implement this sort of app and use your face at all, for example. But other than that, it's fine. There are many more other life-threatening situations that happen in the offline world than it is in the online world. So, strike a balance and pick your poison. So that's my take on this. Thank you.
Right. So from my side, I will just have two key points in the interest of time. So I totally echo what exactly Karim has excellently highlighted and also his views. Um, Besides data protection, in the early part of the question, I think in relation to images, and also there's also an element of IP rights, intellectual property rights as well. For example, if an AI developer really develop a very unique machine learning model, deep learning model, in relation to capturing an image of a very famous actor or actress in Indonesia, for example, because in the real world, it takes at least the minimum 2-3 months, for a film to be, I would say, from end to end to be produced. But AI can like do that maybe within a month or maybe within a week, for example, right? Okay, I'm just creating a scenario here or a hypothetical scenario. So the question is, who owns the IP right? So that's number one. Number two, okay, is it infringement of IP rights? And number three, it's not just intellectual property in the context of copyright, but also in the context of the personal data, because personal data also covers image, voice, and as well as other elements as well, right? So there's also another areas of intellectual property that are still very blurry, in the current debate, right? And I think it's still work in progress, and the regulators around the world are also working with IP regulators in relation to like really understand how they need to collaborate when it comes to this intersection, right? I just want to cover that, that point in relation to the images or voice, because of course, in the context of deepfake, okay, even though it's like almost 90% or 80%, right? Wow, looks similar, but always ask a question: is it, from the right source? Is it, really? Have you gone through authentication, verification, and all of this kind of internal process or external process as part of your due diligence, right? In relation to that scenario. Another point, which I highlighted a while ago about telling a story, in a very simple way. Do not overcomplicate the story, right? I know it sounds simple, but this is actually what you need to actually tell. For example, I mean, most of you guys who are listening and maybe relearning, in relation to what AI is all about. Okay, everyone has the collective or individual responsibility, to tell to Indonesia, to tell to ASEAN, hey guys, okay, we can use AI, all right, but if you want to use AI, okay, we have to always to think about okay the impact of the the data, the source of the data, and the third is okay, is it applicable, and the fourth is right, okay, let us actually tell this as part of the campaign. But of course it is very polarized, because if you look into ASEAN as a region, if you look in Indonesia as a region, for example, where everything is so centered in Java, in itself being a commercial center. But what happened to the business community or entrepreneurs in Kalimantan, for example? What happened to community in Sumatra, for example? They need to listen to the story, right? And what happened to small businesses? The street food or hawkers, the sellers. They need to understand what it's all about, and it's not easy to tell a technical language to someone who don't understand some of this stuff. So you have to really come up with a metaphor that can really contextualize in their own understanding, in their own world, right? Maybe create a very creative content and tell to the sellers and hawkers, okay, Bapak, Ibu, AI ini sebenarnya begini, I don't know, but you have to really think about a creative approach, okay, to reach that kind of awareness. And this is actually what we are facing in the UK, we are facing in Europe, because only the educated, intelligent people understand what it's all about. And then it leaves that a gap, a huge gap. The normal consumers who don't understand the law, data subjects who don't understand the law, data subjects who don't understand the technology, human who do only cherry pick certain information through social media. Okay, those who really cherry pick TikTok information, oh, AI is all about it, they rely on that. So this is actually a reality in the world today, right? I'm not saying that influencers are not good, but influencers, YouTubers have to play a role to create that kind of awareness as part of the program. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Karim and Mr. Norris, for the answer for the first question. The second question in our first Q&A session is from Elsa from UT Bogor. With the development of AI capabilities that are becoming more advanced over time, is it possible for the system to have a self-awareness? We'll start with Mr. Norris this time, and then Karim. The floor is yours.
This is a very technical question. I think Karim can answer better than me. So the short answer is yes. This is actually based on my engagement with data coders, with AI developers, and even with data officers, because you can actually design anything with AI, right? Again, the key question here is go back to the main question, right? If you want to do a system self awareness, right? Okay, what is exactly the workflow of that? right? What exactly that you need to achieve, as part of that kind of sandbox exercise within that environment. Once you have developed, once you are able to answer those questions, then you should be able to like really stress test this more from the risk and assurance perspective, if any. But the reality nowadays is that not many companies have the resource to do that because they do not have a data protection officer, as a key subject matter expert to tell or to guide or to accelerate the process. For example, Indonesia, okay, there's definitely a requirement to have a data protection officer, but at the same time, you have to also calibrate and recalibrate that exercise across the network. Even reach out to Karim. I mean, he's more than happy to be a consultant in this particular project, for example. So I think the short answer is yes. Everything is really workable in AI environment. Doesn't matter self awareness. Very very interesting. I actually read one of the chapters in this book again, where chapter 5 and 6 highlighted about hackers are now developing a AI, kind of hacking model to hack another hacker. So meaning AI versus AI in the context of data breach as a service, right? So this is actually happening in the world today, and there are many hackers, ethical hackers, non-ethical hackers, and they actually develop a workflow using AI to really compete against an ethical hacker. And everything is really, really, really possible in AI, and that's why Elon Musk, part of the co-founder of OpenAI, and also esteemed scholars and professors globally, issued a letter, 5 weeks ago, that the world should pause on AI because it's so scary. Okay, and we should address the fundamentals. That's more the concern. I'm not sure it is PR exercise because it's US who started everything, but then again, you need to actually like, really contextualize it based on the purpose. Yeah. So that's my response to the very good question.
Yes, it is a very good question. I agree with Mr. Norris, and you know, I try to if, going back to the question itself. I'm thinking, maybe when they try to mention system self awareness, it's not quite clear what you're trying to say, but I assume maybe in your mind, AI is something like Terminator or something like that, the sentient being where they have full autonomous control of what they have. And that's sort of, that's if that's the question and you're trying to find an answer to that, then my answer to that will be, it's a maybe, it's a possibility because the future holds, endless possibilities. But in the context of current AI right now, I'd say that most of the AIs right now have a sort of a system self-awareness in a sense that their self-awareness is the awareness of the limitations of themselves. Say, for example, if you use ChatGPT, the first thing that they said is like, okay, as an AI language model, meaning that the fact that it declares itself as an AI language model, it realizes and is aware of what it is positioned, and when it is met with limitations, it also declares that I cannot answer this because I am only an AI language model and I only have data up to the year 2021. So there is a level of self-awareness, and in that context it is very possible and is being done. But if you're talking about the creepy self-awareness in the context of, say, for example, AI becoming sentient, then in this context, then Google has sort of created an AI chatbot, much like ChatGPT 2, and it sort of stirred a little bit of controversy, which is the Lambda, in a way that sort of showed chats and messages that sort of depicted itself having its own sentient thought, and which is why that's why current the trending progress of AI right now is so it's going too fast to the point that we don't really have this sort of you know when we talk about robots, is the Asimov law, the three robots that the three laws that a robot has to command, but that's all science fiction and that's only a novel. But in this context, we don't have the same thing for AI as at the moment. So we are progressing more on the technical side, but we are still lacking in the ethical and regulation side. So I guess that's the answer to this question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then our third question, our last question in our first section of the Q&A. This is from Eleanor from Universitas Indonesia. Her question is, how can we ensure that AI systems are transparent in their decision-making processes? And how can we hold them accountable for errors and biases? We'll start with Karim this time, followed by Mr. Norris.
Okay, maybe for this question, Mr. Norris will know more about the legal aspect. But in this context, this question can also be implemented for any tech platform in the world, not just only for AI, but for things such as Meta, for Instagram, for WhatsApp, for Twitter. Uh, that's always been the major debacle about when it comes to dealing with tech companies. How do we make sure that they are transparent? Because even though we try to make them transparent, evidently they're not transparent. Case of 2016, for example, Cambridge Analytica. They say that Facebook has been very transparent about what it does with its data and so on and so forth. But then we find out that they've been selling data and getting a profit out of that. So the question is, it is a very interesting question because no matter what we try to do to ensure that these tech platforms and these tech companies try to be transparent, more or less they are not. Especially, for example, in Twitter's context, right now with Elon Musk becoming the CEO of Twitter, it sort of becomes sort of a shambles. The fact that they don't have any HR or PR teams as of the moment due to the massive layoff in U.S. Twitter goes to show that there has to be some sort of a restructuring into how we deal and engage as governments, for example, with these tech companies. So and your question is, in the context of AI, how do we make sure that they're transparent? That's a very good question. Maybe when it comes to AI, it's more transparent because we can see the code that these AIs are built upon. But then again, that means nothing for the lay people. Strings of codes of numbers and lines of all that means absolutely nothing if I look at it because I have no idea what that means. Only then when it's formed in the, for example, in the ChatGPT, for example, then I understand what ChatGPT is. But if I look at the source code, I have no idea what I'm looking at. So what is the transparency that you're looking for? Is it transparency to ensure that that they are giving you the correct answers, they are not trying to misfeed you misinformation and stuff like that? Then I guess the level of transparency that you can get from that is the disclaimer that OpenAI gives and the terms of condition that OpenAI gives or any other tech platforms. But if it's more transparency, which is more accountability, that's quite hard to be quite hard to answer because that's legal aspect, and Mr. Norris can probably follow up with that answer. So I give my time to Mr. Norris.
Thanks very much, Karim. I think you answered the question, even wearing the legal hat. so, um, so comparatively, in the EU GDPR, accountability is the key, and then there's also proportionality, of the data as well. That is important, and also, of course, there are a lot of legal ground processing when it comes to processing data, not only in the context of non-AI environment, but also AI environment. So for those who are aware of the development of the EU GDPR, even though GDPR has been around for the past almost 5 years, the European Commission has been reviewing the current regulation, partly because they collate stakeholders' feedback and as well as receive reviews from professors, academia, activists, consumers, and also sectors, regulated sectors, financial services, telecommunication sectors, and also life sciences. So there are lots of views because GDPR itself is imperfect, and there's no such thing as a perfect law. But it goes back to the accountability, transparency, proportionality, the principle of data processing activities. But then again, even though you actually draft such beautiful laws, excellent data privacy notice, excellent data privacy campaign, excellent data privacy materials in the context of the AI system, the enforcement and also the operationalization is the key, because how exactly that you actually assure and reassure that you have been embedding the accountability as part of your AI system, for example, transparency as part of the AI system, and not only that, from the security point of view, the security by design as part of the accountability, and as well as the privacy by design as part of the accountability. So for those who are aware about privacy by design and security by design, you might also want to relook what is like the AI system weaknesses are. Maybe you can actually ask this question to the coders, to the AI team, to the chief data officers, and the data officers, to the data team, to the marketing team. Right? Okay, can we actually learn what we actually did as a mistake? last year, for example, 6 months, for example, where are we in terms of accountability? Where are we in terms of proportionality? Where are we when it comes to transparency? Should we redesign, not to overhaul, should we actually enroll or perhaps roll out privacy by design and security by design in an AI system, which is very common. I mean, multinational companies like IBM, Microsoft, Google, they have this very big team to do that. Of course, they have the investment, they have the budget, they have the resource because it is AI, as part of their product and services, at the global level. However, the reality and the challenge that we have today is those small companies, right? Small businesses, because they really want to deploy AI system. They really want to deploy, some of these, a targeted, kind of a system depending upon their business model, marketing model. But how exactly they need to embed that accountability and transparency and proportionality, not only to comply with the current PDP in Indonesia, but also the other laws around the world, assuming that the Indonesian entity also process multiple data set, global data set, right? We're not just talking about Indonesian data set, 290 million data set, but also maybe other 200 million data set, which is a mixture of EU data set, Chinese data set, India data set, and as well US data set. And this is where the complexity is, because you are dealing with different laws, right? You are dealing with principles of data protection laws that might be baseline similar, but when you zoom into different regulation or different country by country, it might have a different kind of approach and persona, right? Big companies can do that because they have a big team to advise. But what about small companies? What about startup? What about the technopreneurs? So this is actually where we are seeing. It's not because they overlook this element to really achieve certain level of compromising the autonomy, but also there's also resource and investment. So my hope for Indonesia, or perhaps for ASEAN, is that the ASEAN government has to work closely together at that strategic, level, regional level, and then cascade it at national level, and ensure that the cascading of whatever kind of, policy discussion, regulatory discussion should be very clear, right, to all. I know it's not easy. It's easy to say dirty than done, but then again, just highlight the importance of, autonomy, importance of, accountability, importance of proportionality, as part of your AI system program. Another quick last point, before we end. I know it's almost 2 minutes left at 12 p.m. In fact, I have to catch a flight to Bali to attend a conference in Bali, tomorrow and Thursday. What matters here is that you need to actually understand what exactly the AI story in your organization, what exactly the AI story at the strategic level, right? Once you understand the AI story, consult people like, the expert like Karim, consult, technologies, and as well as, the DPOs, if there is a DPO, and get multiple stakeholders' input. Do not just take a legal input, right? You have to go beyond than that. Understand the workflow, understand the business process, understand, the marketing strategy, understand the PR exercise, and then socialize it with the stakeholders. And that itself is a journey, not a destination. With that, I enter the answer to the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Norris and Karim, for the insightful answers. Uh, Once again, thank you so much, Karim and Mr. Forrest, for today's discussion. It was very impressive and enjoyable. And to sum up the question, I would like to hear some closing statements from both of the speakers. We'll start first with Karim, followed by Mr. Norris. The floor is yours.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Norris, for this very interesting uh, talk show and discussion. And thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this discussion. The questions have been very interesting. I guess what I do want to say is, what I've said from the beginning. Think of AI as a tool, and it's only limited by what you are capable of. Meaning that AI will not be, some you know not some mega something software that will just simply replace you, but it's a complementary tool that you can use and utilize to its fullest potential, only if you understand how to use it, and only if you in a way study and become more sophisticated in how you utilize this AI and how you understand how to utilize the AI. To the you are only limit the AI is only limited to the capabilities of yourself. So we have to learn first before we actually are aware are afraid of being replaced by this AI. So I think that's what I want to say for my last message. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I give my time back to Rizka.
Okay, thank you, Karim. And again, next, Mr. Norris for the closing statement. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Particularly to Center of Digital Society, I know there's a shame that I can't be there. You know, to meet all of you in person. Hopefully, in the future, we'll love to actually engage more with Karim and as well as the wider, the center team members. Perhaps my only, I would say, not final closing remark because AI is work in progress. Because there's always great things AI can do. There's always great things that AI overlook because in the end it goes back to human being, right? Human being is the one who create all of this technology, right? So it goes back to the behavior, the ethics, the motivation, and also something that you need to think about if some of you would like to specialize in the AI, I would say advisory or AI consulting or research in AI, is that you need to think about how exactly the geopolitical landscape of AI, because it also links to geopolitics, as we speak or as I speak, because nowadays we see how exactly the geopolitical roadmap of the world today, what drives behind this is the technology. What drives behind this is actually the data. And that's why the multinational companies, especially in the energy sector, telecommunication sector, not only dominating the infrastructure in terms of the resilience and capability, but they are actually doing a lot of silent AI projects and AI exercise to actually coupled with whatever things that they have been doing. For example, energy company. People talk that data is the new oil. No, data is supplementing oil. As part of that, it actually accelerate whatever kind of future of superpower dominance in the world today that we are living. And there are lots of things that AI can do for humanity, for the earth, because we're not talking just from commercial perspective, but also for the future perspective as well. For example, orangutan is extinct in Indonesia and Malaysia, right? So there is a way that AI can help, and then to tell to these scientists or to researchers how we can ensure that orangutan remains alive the next 200 years, 200 years, right? Maybe AI can help that. There's always good things, that AI can do. As far as the law is concerned, data protection doesn't apply to animal, right? It applies to living individuals. So I think you can actually link that, from the positive perspective. Then climate change. People are talking about, deforestation. People are talking about, all of these issues which are really alarming the world today. And AI can help on that. So I think you have to really not to actually wear the head of risk averse that much, and you have to balance, that kind of thought process and apply security by design and also privacy by design, and importantly, keep on learning and relearning and engaging, and consult, experts like Karim, and as well as any stakeholders in Indonesia, regional level, at ASEAN, and at the world level. With this, thank you very much for having me here, and hopefully we can have another round two conversation, maybe in person, or perhaps in the next 6 months to see how we progress so far, not only in the context of Indonesia but also at the global level.
Thank you again, Karim and Mr. Norris, for the closing statement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation. Our team has sent the link of our e-certificate, which you can access until 2 p.m. Now it's time to announce the best participants. Congratulations to Onel from Airlangga University and Eleanor from Universitas Indonesia. You can contact our admin for further information. Before we end today's discussion, I want to apologize if there are any questions which couldn't be accommodated in this forum. I want to invite you to always look for our official social media to get further information regarding digital information and our upcoming events. I, Rizka Herdiani, as a moderator, would like to apologize if something inconvenient happened during today's discussion. Thank you once again, and see you at other events.